Hey guys, tonight we dive into a world where calendars don't hang on kitchen walls and time doesn't tick away in glowing rectangles on your phone. Instead, time curls into the air, soft and gray, rising from sacred fires lit before dawn. You're somewhere high on a plateau now, lying on elk hide near a smoldering fire, surrounded by the crisp hush of dawn and the distant rhythm of a cedar drum echoing through the valley. You're watching the smoke rise, not just for warmth, but for meaning. The tendrils bend westward this morning, and if you were paying attention like the old ones did, you'd know that meant more than a weather shift. It marked the start of something. Of planting. Of dancing. Of preparing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is by your clock, or maybe by your local cactus bloom. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit with the Lakota, or the Hopi, or maybe a firekeeper from the Ojibwe. Their names differ, their landscapes change, but their respect for smoke remains a constant. To them, it's not just combustion, it's language, history, a ticking clock made of earth and breath. When a fire burns in ceremony, the smoke isn't just the escape of heat, it's a rising messenger. And sometimes, it's a calendar. Smoke signals might conjure cartoon images, puffs going up like a Morse code emoji. But real smoke signals were subtler, richer. Yes, some tribes used short bursts to signal movement or war or the arrival of guests. But others observed the quality of the smoke, the density, the color, the way it hugged or climbed the sky, to mark time. Among the Shoshone, elders watched for how tightly smoke clung to the earth in winter. If it rose sluggishly and stayed low, they knew the air was heavy, almost time for the midwinter council. In desert regions, like where the ancestral Puebloans once lived, smoke rising clean and vertical during late spring meant the time had come for planting beans. The air was dry, the wind calm, the earth ready. Historians still argue whether this smoke observation was a formal timekeeping device or more of a natural gut check passed down by habit. But to the people using it, the results were practical and clear. When the smoke leaned northeast, rain would follow. When it didn't rise at all, spirits needed appeasing. Then there's the Yurok tribe from Northern California, whose ceremonial fires lit at the foot of the redwoods were never allowed to die during certain weeks of the year. The smoke had to rise, night and day, marking a sacred stretch of days that honored renewal and community alignment. And here's the quirky bit, some oral traditions mention how different woods gave off different shades of smoke, which the elders read like a seasonal horoscope. Juniper gave off a soft blue, used during winter, willow burned pale and fast, perfect for early spring. Of course, if you've ever tried to build a perfect fire yourself, you know how finicky it can be. A little too much moisture, and your grand timekeeping ceremony becomes a smoke-choked disaster. You hacking and coughing, the spirits unimpressed. Not exactly sacred. But that's where practice came in. Each tribe had designated fire keepers who trained from childhood. Some would watch embers like astronomers watch stars, tracking patterns through their life. One debated tradition suggests that smoke curls were red at sunrise from high cliffs, where the air currents were sharp and clean. Whether or not this was systematic science or deeply refined instinct is up for grabs. But you can imagine standing there, breath steaming in the cold, holding a hand over your brow as smoke twists just enough to tell you the wind from the coast was coming. Time to start the canoe repairs. There's also something undeniably calming about this kind of timekeeping. No ticking. No dings or buzzes. No passive-aggressive calendar invites from coworkers. Just the rhythm of wind and wood, an ancient habit. Maybe that's why it still lingers in places. Some elders in the Navajo Nation, even today, light ceremonial fires in early January and watch the smoke's color to determine how severe the coming winter will be. Think of it as weather prediction, wrapped in culture, seasoned with spirituality, and probably a bit of wishful thinking. Still more accurate than the weather app that said clear skies right before last week's hailstorm. As you settle deeper into the quiet, you realize how much richer life feels when you let time speak in whispers. When the calendar is written in smoke and patience instead of pixels and pop-ups. The fire beside you crackles gently now, nudging up another soft plume into the sky. It bends ever so slightly to the west. Guess spring's almost here. You're still lying there by the fire, smoke curling lazily skyward, but now your eyes shift to the canyon wall nearby, its surface a natural sun clock, smooth in places, ridged in others, a vertical notebook of shadows. This isn't just a pretty rock face. It's how generations of canyon-dwelling tribes, like the ancestral Puebloans in Hohokam, told time. Not by ticking minutes, but by watching where the sun's shadow crept, paused, or disappeared altogether. You don't need batteries when the whole sky is your sundial. Each morning, sunlight filters through the canyon, and those who know where to look can see it land, with pinpoint precision, on carved niches, petroglyph spirals, or small piles of intentionally placed stones. When a shadow reaches the exact center of a spiral, the elders might murmur something like, "The turning point comes." It could mean a solstice, or the day to begin a week-long prayer vigil, or simply that the cicadas will be deafening by noon. The practical and the spiritual often held hands in these moments. These shadow readers didn't just guess. They returned, year after year, generation after generation, observing the tiniest shifts. Some even marked the length of a shadow cast by a pointed stick, or gnomon, planted permanently in packed earth. That stick's shadow told them everything: how close the harvest was, when to prepare for snow, when to expect thunder. A quirky tidbit? In a few places, such as the Chaco Canyon complex in New Mexico, archaeologists have found narrow windows carved into stone dwellings, aligned not for airflow or light but purely to allow one sunbeam to cross a glyph at an exact date. On the summer solstice, that beam slices through like a heavenly knife. If that doesn't give you goosebumps, it's probably because you're already buried under 10 blankets. But here's where it gets delightfully fuzzy. Some scholars argue that these alignments were intentional, sacred, precise. Others? They say we're just reading way too much into lucky rock holes. Was it ancient astronomy or well-timed coincidence? Historians still argue whether these light displays were elaborate celestial calculators or just happy accidents of erosion and builder instinct. You lean against the stone wall now, watching your own shadow stretch behind you, long and spindly in the low morning light. It makes you feel tiny, in a good way. Like time isn't something you wrestle with, but something you walk beside. Your shadow isn't just a shape, it's a measure. And your body, by existing, is helping tell the day's story. Some tribes even use moving shadows as countdowns. There's record of a practice in which a feather, stuck upright into a crack in the canyon floor, would cast a thin, dancing shadow at noon. Each day closer to a solstice, the shadow would lean a little more until, on that sacred day, it disappeared altogether beneath the sun's gaze. After that, the days would start to stretch or shrink, and with them, the people's rhythms would change too. And lest you think it was all math and stone, remember, human memory is incredibly good at pattern recognition. A boy who learned from his grandfather to mark how far the morning shadow reached on the first day of snow might one day pass that same knowledge to his granddaughter, not because it was written down but because it was felt. The warmth of the stone beneath your hand, the sound of footsteps crunching frost, the exact angle of light that finally woke the lizards again. One charming detail? In some regions, the shadow of a dancing child during certain festivals was said to foretell the year's fortune. A high leap cast a long shadow, strong crops. A stumble meant caution. Whether it was spiritual, metaphorical, or just a really good excuse for kids to show off, the tradition stuck. And let's be honest, your shadow probably dances more often than your actual feet do these days. You shift your position slightly, and just like that, your own shadow shortens. You've moved through time. Without effort, without pressure. Just smoke and light and shadow. No alarms needed. Somewhere nearby, a raven calls. You watch its shadow flicker across the canyon wall. Even birds, it seems, are time markers here. You wonder if the people before you counted those, too. You close your eyes briefly and imagine it again, rows of watchers, all generations of the tribe, gathered in silence as the shadow creeps to its marker. When it finally touches the spot, someone exhales deeply. The moment is known. The calendar has turned. Still nestled in the hush of canyon echoes, you rise slowly and wander beyond the shadow-watching walls, into a clearing where wooden poles rise toward the sky, feathered and carved, clustered like sentinels. One stands taller than the rest, a totem pole, towering and detailed, its grooves worn smooth by generations of reverent fingers. What you notice first are the animals, beavers, eagles, wolves, all stacked in visual stories. But as you sit with it, you start to see something else. A pattern. Not just symbolic but rhythmic, almost like a ticking you can feel in your chest. Among tribes like the Tlingit and Haida of the Pacific Northwest, totem poles weren't just historical records or clan identifiers. In some cases, they acted as calendars carved into wood in memory. Their sequences of figures, sometimes 12, sometimes 13, corresponded to lunar cycles. A bear might mark a spring hunt. A salmon might signify midsummer's bounty. A raven perched near the top could signal the time of storytelling and migration. It wasn't just what was carved, it was how it was carved. Feathers pointed one way or another, small notches below animal paws, even the size of eyes, each could mean a specific time or season. Historians still debate whether these symbols represented strict monthly demarcations or looser seasonal periods defined by food, weather, and ceremony. But many agree that those who knew how to read the totem could tell not just their lineage, but their place in the year. Here's the fringe detail: some oral traditions claim certain poles would hum in the wind when a full moon neared. Now, we're not saying the wood actually sang, but thin channels carved intentionally may have caught wind like flutes. It's hard to prove, and easy to romanticize, but when you're standing next to a giant wooden bear with moon symbols carved in its claws, you can kind of believe it. The full moon mattered, not just because of its light, but because it marked transitions between harvests, spiritual phases, even ages. Some tribes tracked moons instead of months, like the Cree, who named them moon when the leaves fall, moon of the popping trees, moon when the geese return. Each name came from close observation, passed through stories more durable than paper. And here's the thing, not all totems were vertical. Some were carved horizontally into lodge poles or even canoe ribs, with sequences of bumps and burnt-in symbols acting as mnemonic devices. A child learning them might run their fingers along the notches, chanting softly, memorizing a timeline of tides, dances, or deaths. Memory, time, and touch, all braided together. You pause at the base of one of these poles. Moss grows where an old carving of a frog once squatted. You realize that in time, even the calendar forgets. Wood rots. Shapes blur. But stories? They adapt. The tribes kept retelling these moon cycles long after some of the poles had toppled. The image became voice, then dance, then beadwork. But the beat, the lunar rhythm, remained. One respected elder once described the moon calendar like a necklace. Each moon is a bead. Some are bright, some are dark, but they're strung in a line, year after year. And just like a real necklace, you'd wear it differently depending on the season. Literally. In some regions, specific ceremonial garb was worn only under certain moons, to signal what time it was, not just in nature, but in the soul. Time wasn't linear, it was embodied. You run a finger along the bottom carving of the pole, an eagle with wings half spread, a tiny notch beneath its eye. That one, maybe, marked the final moon of the year. The moon when people gathered to remember the dead. To sing songs into smoke, so ancestors would hear. That eagle's been watching seasons pass for 200 years now. Long after the people who carved it vanished into story. You look up. The moon isn't out yet, but the shadows are lengthening. Maybe it's time to prepare. You follow an arrow trail now, winding away from the carved poles and into the open prairie, where brittle grass crunches under your feet and a chill breeze rustles the bones of yesterday's corn. You reach a weathered fire pit, long cold, surrounded by scattered remains, a cracked stone scraper, a smoothed rib bone, and, nestled in the ashes, the unmistakable arc of a buffalo shoulder blade, etched, not randomly, but deliberately, with tiny lines. You're looking at what some Plains tribes used as a seasonal ledger, a primitive but poetic way of marking time. The Lakota, for instance, recorded important tribal events in what they called winter counts, painted pictographs arranged in spiral sequences, often on buffalo hides. But sometimes, especially in more remote or ritual settings, time was marked in bone. A shoulder blade might be burned slightly to form dark patches, or scored with a flint knife to record seasonal milestones, first snow, new calf, summer storm, or eclipse. Historians still argue whether these marks were personal mementos or communal records, something closer to a diary or a calendar. But when you think about it, does it really matter? Either way, someone was keeping track. Someone knew that time passed not in weeks or months, but in thunderclaps, migrations, and the occasional surprise moose. And it wasn't just bones. Some artifacts suggest stone tools were placed deliberately in shallow caches, aligned with certain stars or constellations that rose only at key times of year. A small cluster of flint knives, buried beneath a flat rock, might mark the time when the tribe should begin weaving winter moccasins. or when the salmon were expected to surge upriver. This gets a little blurry. Some say it's superstition, others insist it was proto-astronomy. Still others call it the original data visualization. Then there's the curious matter of proto-time zones. You'd think that's a modern concept, invented by railroad barons or snarky Swiss watchmakers. But no, some scholars propose that certain tribes adjusted their calendars depending on where they traveled, especially the nomadic ones. If a hunting party moved 200 miles west, their familiar seasonal signs, stars, bird calls, even smoke behavior, shifted slightly. So, they adjusted. Not in hours, but in attitude. You don't need a watch when the sky tells you everything, just a willingness to listen to it again from a new place. In fact, some elders taught that the position of buffalo herds alone could reset the mental calendar. When the great shaggy masses started inching south and the wind turned sour, you didn't need a date, you needed to move your camp. Time, in that sense, wasn't fixed. It was relational. Time happened around you, not to you. And bones? Well, they made great mnemonic tools. Imagine sitting with your uncle by a winter fire. He picks up a rib bone, touches the charred edge, and says, "This burn, this was the storm that tore 3 teepees. That cut the trail too early. That made the snow wolves bold. That single scratch becomes an entire season." You peer down at the buffalo bone in your hand now, feeling the grooves with your thumb. One is deep, almost angry. Another shallow and precise. Perhaps they're just idle marks. Perhaps they're a code. The truth is, some scholars believe only the person who carved the bone could truly read it. No translation key. Just a tactile memory that anchored a moment in time. And then there's the odd story from the Crow people about a bone that hummed during the spring thaw. Supposedly, when placed beside a certain rock and struck just so, it emitted a tone that echoed through the canyon in a way that meant, "Plant now." You're probably raising an eyebrow. That's fine. But some traditions endure not because they make sense, but because they work. You glance toward the western horizon. The sky is bleeding orange now, and a flock of birds breaks formation to dart eastward. Someone would have counted that, too. Someone might have said, "Time to gather pine sap." Not because of a rule. Because of a rhythm. A nearby bush rustles. A prairie dog watches you like it's guarding a secret. Maybe it is. Time, after all, was never just about counting days. It was about remembering moments worth counting. You tuck the buffalo bone gently back into the ash. The marks may have outlived their maker, but the message, whatever it was, still lingers in the quiet. You wander further now, your steps leading into a dry basin where the sun beats down sharp and slow, the wind silent as if holding its breath. Cactus spines shimmer faintly in the distance, and everything feels suspended, like the desert itself is waiting for a signal. You crouch beside a squat, wide cactus with fat green pads and delicate yellow blossoms. And just like that, you realize, this bloom is the clock. To many desert tribes, like the Tohono in the American Southwest, cactus blooms were more than just pretty distractions, they were finely tuned timepieces. The moment the saguaro or prickly pear began to flower, it meant certain things could begin: harvests, migrations, moon ceremonies. The plant didn't just decorate the desert, it announced its schedule. Some families even tracked which part of the cactus bloomed first, north face versus south, as subtle signals for the kind of year ahead. You rub a cactus petal between your fingers, soft, surprisingly juicy. In a region where rainfall was a minor miracle, the cactus bloom was sacred. The autumn watched for the saguaro fruit, plump and red, splitting open in the heat like a cosmic alarm clock. The timing of this fruit's ripening didn't just mark a food source, it kicked off intense spiritual rituals. Harvesting it was done with reverence, using tools made of long wooden ribs from the very same plant. Some tribes even timed family reunions or tribal council meetings to coincide with blooming cycles. Why? Because the fruit was sweet, the days were long, and people were mobile. And, let's be honest, no one really wants to discuss interclan trade negotiations in February windstorms. Now here's a quirky side note: in certain traditions, when a cactus bloomed too early, it was seen as a warning. Not of bad weather, but of bad behavior. Someone has broken harmony, the elders would say. The plant responded. Was it superstition? Maybe. But you try explaining why your smart TV keeps glitching only when you're stressed. The desert had its own algorithms. Cactus clocks weren't just local either. Nomadic groups like the Apache, who traveled across multiple ecological zones, kept mental notes of plant timing. One camp might have blooming cactus while another was still wrapped in winter's grip. This overlap became a living map, allowing travelers to calibrate their internal calendars without needing a sundial or a calendar app. And if you really want to impress your inner nerd, know this: some tribes also used moonlight reflection on cactus spines to time nighttime rituals. The silvery gleam that bounces off those stiff needles on a full moon night? It's gorgeous, yes, but for some, it also indicated the correct time to begin specific dances or chants. Historians still argue whether this was intentional celestial alignment or poetic improvisation. But you can imagine the hush of a desert dance circle, each dancer catching the moon on their sleeve, their timing cued not by clocks, but by glow. Meanwhile, nearby bugs, birds, and small mammals also reacted to the bloom. You'd notice a sharp increase in bee activity, or the sudden reappearance of the hummingbird scouts. Observing these changes was another form of tracking time. If the bugs were back and the cactus had cracked, it meant something was beginning. You glance up. The sun has begun to slide lower. The cactus casts a short shadow now, barely reaching your knees. You remember what an autumn elder once said: the cactus teaches patience. It blooms when it's ready, not when you want it to. A good reminder for the rest of life, too. You reach into your pouch and imagine placing a small rock beside this cactus. People used to mark moments like this, subtle, seasonal bookmarks. Maybe you'll start your own tradition. And so you walk on, the desert behind you beginning to cool, the cactus blooms slowly closing as the sky turns bruised violet. Whatever time it is, it's exactly the right time to be here. You're on higher ground now, tucked into the folds of a narrow valley where morning chill still clings to the rocks. A thin column of smoke rises ahead, soft, steady, and twisting like a loose ribbon toward the brightening sky. You pause, watching it curl and stretch before bending eastward with the breeze. It's not just warmth, it's information. Among many tribes across North America, especially in regions prone to long winters or unpredictable weather, morning smoke behavior served as a kind of atmospheric newspaper. If the smoke drifted low and sluggish, it meant moisture clung to the air. A storm was likely. If it shot up fast and clean, skies would probably stay clear. But more than that, some communities used these subtle signs to guide spiritual timing. The way the smoke behaved could determine when a blessing should be offered, or whether a medicine ceremony should wait another day. You wouldn't want to rush the ancestors just because your schedule was tight. Historians still argue whether this daily smoke watching counted as systematic observation or was simply a poetic interpretation of weather. But records from early European visitors suggest tribal observers were remarkably accurate. A Jesuit missionary in the 1600s noted that his Algonquin hosts foretold the coming snows with only a glance at the fire's breath. Better than most meteorologists, though, admittedly, the bar is low. There's a lovely fringe belief, passed down in some Iroquoian oral traditions, that when smoke spirals clockwise at dawn, the spirits are listening. And if it spirals counterclockwise, they're either annoyed or asleep. Either way, probably best not to ask for anything too ambitious. In the far north, Inuit communities used whale oil lamps, which produced a specific kind of smoke. The direction and shape of the smoke curling from these lamps helped predict shifts in sea ice and wind patterns. When the smoke blew low and flat, it signaled good hunting weather, a rare and precious window in regions where time was tracked not in weeks but in walrus sightings and ice cracks. Then there's the image you won't forget: a council circle at dawn, elders seated quietly around a smoldering fire, all eyes on the smoke. No one speaks. They just watch, their thoughts rising like the ash, looking for signs. You're not watching a forecast. You're watching a moment unfold. Time here isn't ticking, it's unfolding, breathing. And just when you think smoke couldn't possibly do anything else, there's this: in some tribes, special herbs were added to the morning fire, not just for scent or symbolism, but because their smoke would behave differently. Sage, for instance, created thick, slow-moving tendrils. Sweetgrass smoke floated higher and more erratic. The blend used each morning could function like a ritual barometer, indicating not just environmental change but spiritual readiness. There's a practical element, too. If you're living in a tent or lodge or earth-covered home, your interior smoke tells you something about the air outside. Smoke trapped inside meant low pressure, a likely storm. Smoke that pulled upward eagerly meant dry skies, time to travel. That's not mysticism, that's physics wearing a deerskin coat. You crouch near a cold fire pit and strike a match, letting the flame catch on dry moss. The smoke rises lazily at first, then lifts straight into the sky like it's been summoned. You're not asking it anything. You're just listening, watching. A bird calls nearby, sharp, repetitive, a kind of avian alarm clock. The smoke tilts briefly with the breeze, then steadies. It doesn't seem rushed. Neither should you. One final, poetic twist? In some Hopi and Pueblo traditions, smoke at sunrise was believed to meet the day, as if greeting the sun, offering it a trail to follow into the sky. Lighting a fire at dawn wasn't just about warmth. It was about acknowledgement. A smoky handshake between the earth and the sky. So you sit still now,